What does, Philipp Hildebrand, a policy mistake from the Fed today actually look like?
Well, a policy mistake, I guess, would be if they don't manage to impose credibility of the framework. And you saw a little bit of a flavor of that. I don't want to read too much into the 24-hour kind of price or news cycle, but you saw a flavor of that. In other words, if they can convince the markets that they're serious about overshooting inflation for some time in order to align themselves with the new framework. And of course, in that context, the fact that inflation expectations have come back again so quickly after the meeting is not great news. But again, I wouldn't read too much into this. We're too focused on the day-by-day news cycle and price action. The key here is the current inflation forecast of the Federal Reserve basically implies is the minimum you would need in order to align yourself with this new principle, the core principle of the new framework, namely that this make-up strategy that you're going to have a couple of years of higher inflation in order to make up for past undershooting.
What does it mean so the markets at some point will settle, I guess, when they figure this out. What's the next catalyst for the markets?
I think just a little bit of time. I'm still struck by lots of discussions and, frankly, diverging views around what the Fed is really trying to do. And this, by the way, I think is also an important lesson for the ECB as they go into the final stage of this deliberation of the new framework, which I suppose will be announced sometime in September, to really be very clear as to what the new framework is. The framework the Fed has adopted is presumably by design fairly loose. We have felt it lacks some guardrails around precisely the timing of how long you intend to overshoot. And I think it's these uncertainties that then give rise to different market views, and that gives rise to price volatility. Again, I think, a couple more press conferences. Speeches are not always helpful because, of course, anybody on the FOMC can speak. And as we saw the other day, that can confuse the message. So I would focus on the official communication and see how they intend to implement, in a sense, live this new framework over time.
Philipp, is there anything that you worry about how we view the recovery? I mean, one thing that keeps on striking me almost day in, day out is actually the UK, one of the most vaccinated countries in the world. And then we talk about, the resurgent possible fourth wave of COVID-19. Is this something that actually, it's very difficult to forecast, so it's very difficult for economists to actually put into their forecasts. Is that where we could have a mismatch, or is there something else that you worry about?
I think the most important thing is this is not a recovery, it's a restart. And it's very important to keep that in mind. It's a completely different dynamic than what we would have had after the financial crisis or any other crisis where you have a kind of normal business cycle recovery. This is like a beach resort that opens on day one and the beaches are full. We're going to see huge GDP numbers, and the US demand is going to be enormous. Europe will lag not far behind. So I think we need to expect a lot of volatility around the data points because this is a restart, not a recovery. It's completely different. And we have, because it's so different and so sudden, we have a lot of bottlenecks in the supply chain. So take those two things together, we're going to have a lot of volatility. And I think the key is to look through that. What I'm worried about most, I suppose, is still COVID, right? This is all based on getting out of the pandemic. We have a clear path to get out of it, and that's through vaccination. I worry that 85% of all vaccines that have been administered have been done in the rich world. So that's clearly not only a moral, but also a major economic problem that the world faces. And then we just need to make sure that this vaccination strategy persists and can complete so we can see continuation of this restart, and then ultimately growth will settle into whatever the new potential will be after the crisis. So I think the key risk factor to watch continues to be vaccinations, the vaccination strategy, the global aspect of that, and the pandemic generally. In other words, how we can ensure that we don't have something that kind of puts us back into COVID mode again.